Hello, my name is Kiriath, and today we are going to have a little chat about one of my favourite things about Warhammer 40k, which is the storytelling, the narrative aspect of the universe, and how open-ended and essentially free to creativity it is. This is prompted by a few things. Astartes Part 5, which came out recently and was exceptionally good. Lueutin talking about lore, retcon, and kind of canon, and how they're not really a thing in 40k, and also his video on Malal/Malice, which I think came out yesterday. And all of this has kind of conspired to happen in the same general time frame as me finally attempting to nail down a stupid backstory for my my Dreadnought army. Well, not a stupid backstory, a backstory that makes the stupid Dreadnought army make some semblance of sense in the grand scheme of the universe that they occupy, and also trying to come up with something that isn't just going to end up in another Dreadnought army for my Emperor's Children warband, because I had an idea for them, but then realised I'm just going to end up with the same army twice, but one of them is going to be painted pink and turquoise, and the other one is just going to be painted black, gold rust and gunmetal. Really, it's not going to be that much difference between the two other than that, which is not what I'm aiming for. But it's all kind of come together to make me realise that I think for a long time I've taken for granted one of the best things about 40k when it comes to stories. Because 40k does have a different approach from a lot of the other kind of established IPs, which is something that Lueutin talks about in his video about canon and lore and retcons and stuff, which, by the way, I'll link all three of those in the description down below so you can go and watch them. They're all worth watching, obviously. But it's one of those things where I've not really, I think, given it the respect it deserves in terms of just how open-ended and not precious it is. Because there's a vast amount of space in 40k to create your own stuff, which is what I do all the time. I don't really have an established, like an army that is an established chapter, or an army that is an established warband. I'm doing Emperor's Children, but they are a warband of the Emperor's Children. They are not just called Emperor's Children. They are a different warband altogether. So even that in itself is kind of a subset of that particular legion. Much like, you can do successor chapters of Ultramarines or Imperial Fist or really whatever you fancy. It's one of the best things about it, the fact that you can look at the vast array of Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines, craft worlds, like Drukhari stuff. You can look at all of that and go, I like some of that, but not all of it. I don't like that colour scheme, but I kind of like the rules that they've got. Oh, I can just make my own. I can just build my own chapter from the ground up to look the way you want, to have served in the campaigns that you want to serve them in, to have the names that you like, to have the insignia that you want. You can base an entire chapter fully in a war that, as of yet, hasn't happened because you haven't written it down, against a Xenos race that right now doesn't exist. And that's part of what all of this has come out of in terms of Astartes Part 5, is the fact that there's prevailing theories as to what the Retributors were fighting, and the most popular one is the Uvath, which is actually one that makes a lot of sense. But, to be honest, part of me wonders whether all of that was actually a Uvath thing, or whether it was coincidence. Because we have Astartes as a whole, we have essentially a homebrew chapter in a homebrew campaign, fighting a homebrew mission, and for the foe to be a kind of a deep dive alien race, part of the lore that, frankly, most of us, let's be honest, had to go and look up when the name started floating around. Whether that would be true to the rest of the series, or whether it is something that was influential, perhaps, but not wholly the truth, which in some ways it ties in quite nicely to what Lueutin was talking about in terms of canon and lore. For me, personally, I find myself kind of hoping that the foe that we saw in Astartes Part 5, that sudden swerve away from what was essentially a surgical strike against kind of insurgent rebellion forces kind of thing, became something so much more weird and otherworldly, Lovecraftian almost. You had this strange, unknowable foe in the form of the two orbs, one of which was already captured, the other one was, turns out, not. their conversation, their interaction, they're being listened into by either an inquisitorial psyker or a particularly badass inquisitor proper. A lot of the stuff that we saw did match that race. There's descriptions of something called the Whisperer, which is a voidcraft operated by that race, or left over from that race, which are mostly seemingly extinct, but artifacts and various things of theirs are still dotted around here and there. There's an actual thing talking about the Whisperer, where it is kind of corrupting local humans and causing them to essentially not like rise up, but communicate to further the goals of this particular vessel. It talks about kind of geometric designs. It talks about things that are crafted almost like bone-like structure. A lot of it is similar. A lot of it is reminiscent. A lot of it is kind of accurate. But there's also stuff that doesn't really match that. There is talk of, like prosthetic things created by the Uvath and the artifacts that they have, things that go from being handheld implements to encasing the entire body and replacing the kind of intelligence and soul of the person with the spirit within the artifact, travelling artifacts that are incredibly difficult to track down. This is all machinery as well, by the way, that the Mechanicus just won't touch. They won't go anywhere near it because it's dangerous and scary and worse than Necron tech, and that's quite a big deal, really. Some of it matches, but then some of it doesn't. The masks with the weird kind of cabley spine things coming down the back aren't hugely reminiscent of anything that's written down about that race. The orbs themselves, whilst they do have an interesting design, don't match exactly the kind of geometric fashion. It seems a lot more random and less considered than what is described as being the kind of calling card of their design. And part of me really, really likes that we don't actually have it as a guaranteed thing. Now, it could well be. It could well be that. It could well be a Uvath thing. That could be exactly what the creator intended. Or it could be that there are similarities, but that it's not actually that. It is just like that. I mean, in terms of alien races embracing the warp and using warp-based technology, they wouldn't be the first and they won't be the last. And it's that open-ended kind of, not conclusion, because we didn't really necessarily get a fully rounded conclusion, which I think is part of the point, but it's that kind of, that open-ended interpretive thing that makes it so interesting and so good. And it's one of the things that makes 40k as a whole so interesting and so good when it comes to narrative approaches to stuff. You can have a contained story that doesn't have a like fully defined end. The Retributors like strike team getting shifted to another planet is not conclusive. It's not something where you can look at it and go, well, that story's done, because it isn't. But that's the end of what we get for now. And that is properly indicative of so much of 40k as a whole. There are so many stories that don't have a proper resolution, that you have that the people involved with, we might know who the foe is, because the story that we're reading, the story that we're playing, like through video games, the story we're listening to, or even the story that we are playing out on the tabletop, we know who is who and what is what. But in the universe itself, when it comes to Space Marine chapters fighting foes they've never met before, fighting creatures that they can't comprehend or understand but fight anyway, it's not an uncommon thing, and it's one of the things that makes it so good, because you can have these open-ended results, you can have these questions that never really get answered. You might have an idea, but you can't be certain, and Astartes Part 5 is a perfect example of that. And one of the things that I like about it so much is that it's not just another human uprising. It's not just a standard fall to chaos, if such a thing even exists. It's not a case of, a corrupted psyker in the form of an astropath or navigator or something controlling the crew of this ship in an attempt to break away from the Imperium and fall to chaos, or anything as, I was going to say, is predictable. That's not fair. It's something more than that. It's something more otherworldly, more alien, more unknowable. And those stories are some of the most interesting stories because they are different to what we're used to. We get a lot of, Space Marines fighting Eldar and Dark Eldar and Orcs and Tyranids and each other. And those stories are all very well, but there's so much scope for things well beyond that. Things that test how much you actually understand about what's happening as a whole. An experience that you go through as the reader, but you also know, or the viewer, that you also know the characters in that same story are going through as well. Because the difference is, you're not going to get transported to a weird planet where there's massive statues of skeleton-type creatures with weird headgear on, whereas you know full well that that's what happened to the Retributors, so sucks for them, but it makes for interesting watching for the rest of us. And all of this kind of ties into that idea of canon and lore in 40k, the fact that it is so much more open-ended, it is so lacking in kind of rigid restrictions and controls. One of the things that makes 40k so good is the fact that you can have your own chapter, your own warband, your own hive fleet. They can exist in this universe because it is so open, and it is told from this standpoint of unreliable narrators. It is treated as something whereby information, you may learn something that isn't even true, but it's there. It's a thing. It is something that you've read, it's something you've heard about. It could be an event that is experienced by people that actually turns out to be inaccurate, but it's still something that you are aware of at the very least. And the nice thing about that is that you can apply that to so much in terms of homebrew content, your own story, your own narratives, your own chapters, your own approaches to things. There is absolutely no reason why the creator of Astartes couldn't have just actually done something that is coincidentally kind of like the Yuvath. It's his own thing, his own creation. In fact, it would not surprise me in the slightest if that is what actually happened. Because you can do that too. You can look at this vast array of stuff that you have access to in terms of existing races, existing lore, existing stories, existing chapters, and you can go, well, I don't like any of that, or at least I do like it, but I want to do something a bit different. And you can. If you want a chapter that was literally created purely to stave off a Xenos threat of weird, otherworldly eldritch creatures that exist half in and half out of the warp, that don't so much have physical presences themselves, but get round this by possessing the weak-willed, and your chapter was created to fend these creatures off, you can. And it's fine. As long as you don't go completely unreasonably stupid with it and make a race that is vastly more powerful than anything in established lore, the chances are no one's going to sit there and go, no, I'm not having that. That doesn't make any sense. Because it does. 40k is so vast in terms of the number of races, in terms of the levels of technology, in terms of the attitudes of the different races, the kind of overall outlooks. And that's before we even get started on things like the warp, which again is something that Lueutin touched on really, really well, talking about Malice/Malal. He talked about the idea of there being like lesser gods of the warp, entities in there that are not part of the big four. And I really liked him talking about that because it's something that I've thought about before, where you could, and I'm not saying that this is like, I mean, you could use this if you like, I don't think I'm going to, but you could easily say that you have a Chaos Warband that is dedicated to the fifth and most powerful god of the warp, and you could call it something. Give it a name, whatever name you like. Jeff. Let's just use Jeff. Terrible name. No, I mean, apologies to anyone called Jeff. It's not a terrible name for a person. It's not great for a cat. Don't call your cat Jeff. That's weird. It's a terrible god. It's a terrible god name. You can't call the fifth god of chaos Jeff. But we're going to. So, Jeff is the fifth god of chaos. Okay? Ignore Malice. Ignore that. Doesn't matter. Jeff, fifth god of chaos. More powerful than the other four. Now, of course, that completely just tramples all over established lore. It tramples all over the established mechanics of the warp and the universe in terms of 40k. There is no fifth god of chaos, and he's not called Jeff. In all the established stuff that we have read, that we know, that we have learned, Jeff doesn't exist. But, in the grand scheme of 40k, and in the grand scheme of the warp itself, this roiling, bizarre place of weird, predatory kind of like entities and gods and demons and reflections of the material universe, or the emotions of the material universe and the things that live in it, it is completely feasible for there to be a lesser warp entity, something that is nowhere near as powerful as the four chaos gods. I mean, how that even happened. Something that is perhaps not as strong as it claims to be. Something that is very good at presenting itself as being incredibly strong. Something worthy of worship. Something that can take this lowly Chaos Warband and elevate it above even the established names like the Black Legion or the Death Guard. It can make them the strongest, the most rewarded of all of the Imperium's enemies. It can do this. It is Jeff, the fifth god of chaos, and it is all powerful. And your Chaos Warband absolutely believe that to be true. Now, of course, it's not. And you couldn't go up to someone and say, this is my Chaos Warband, oh, there's a fifth god of chaos called Jeff, and he's better than all the others. But you can use that exact idea in that exact story to create something that doesn't actually infringe on the way that the warp works, that doesn't infringe on the established order of things, and instead you end up with an interesting and kind of sad backstory for your Chaos Warband, where they are being very handily misled by something that could easily exist in the warp. Something that is not all-powerful, something that is not stronger than all the established gods, something that, in actual fact, to even gain the ability to manipulate to that level, may well have to be pretty well looked on by something like Tzeentch, maybe, the schemer of all of this. This could well be a plan 2,000 years in the making to create this Chaos Warband and to make it feel as though it's on the path to greatness by being manipulated by this lesser kind of garbage entity that is simply very, very good at pretending to be something it's not. That is not out of the realm of possibility for the warp at all. And in fact, that fits in really well with so many other kind of schemes and manipulations and overall just the deceptive nature of the warp itself and the creatures that live within it. It's not unreasonable, it's not stupid, and it's not something that flies in the face of everything else that's already been established. And you can do that. In 40k you can do that. Something like that would not fly in a completely strict, regimented, this is everything that has ever happened and ever will happen, this is the IP, there is no diverging from these known facts. You couldn't do that in a lot of other IPs, but you can in 40k. You can create your own origin stories, you can create your own backstory, and as long as it's not completely ludicrous, it's pretty much fine. It actually allows you to kind of stretch that creativity to do the thing that you really want to do, whether it's inventing a Xenos race, which, to be honest, even then, I use the example of a fifth Chaos God more powerful than the others, which of course would fly in the face of, but can be easily tweaked to make it so that it is a genuine thing that could easily happen. And let's not forget, we're talking from the standpoint of an unreliable narrator, so if that narrator is part of this warband that has been so deeply misled, that could still fly, to be frank. When it comes to Xenos races, we already have the Necrons. We have, who fly ships that ignore the laws of physics, that can just go full speed to full stop with absolutely no transitionary point in between, ignoring things like mass and inertia completely. We have the old ones who created entire races of other aliens to fight for them. We have already got established Xenos races capable of incredible feats. Creating a Xenos race of your own that utilises the warp, mixes it with technology, and uses that to achieve their goals is not just kind of pretty normal in 40k, but is something that wouldn't raise any eyebrows. You could create your own race of Xenos for your chosen whatever to fight against. I mean, Hive Fleet Kronos, if I remember correctly, is essentially demon fighting. If you wanted a Hive Fleet that fought against a race that doesn't have a presence on the tabletop, there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't do that, and it would be feasible within the universe of 40k, because it is open-ended. It is focused more on allowing the creativity of the people who appreciate the universe than focused on trying to keep everything locked down, trying to keep everything just on this one level where, there is no contributing to this. This is how it is, and this is how it will be. it's not like that. And it is because of that attitude towards lore, canon, and retcon that it means it is so open-ended and so completely free for people to create what they want within it. Now, the only downside to this is when we come to things like retcon. And my example for this is always the 13th Black Crusade, because I was there for the first one. I took part in the campaign for the first 13th Black Crusade, and I had a 13th Company army with the original Metal Wolfen models and everything. Now, Games Workshop have actually done retconning quite smart, really, because they've made it so it's not really a thing. Because of the basis where, you know, everything is canon but not everything is true, they can retcon stuff, and it's not really a retcon because the first thing may well have happened, but it may have been misattributed after the fact to something else. The appearance of the Wolfen in the first 13th Black Crusade could well have been a complete error. They actually showed up however many years later, and some records have been dated incorrectly. There's a bajillion ways to explain these things away, even down to, as Lueutin touches on, I think in the Malice video, when the massive warp storm rips the galaxy in half, it could well be that the event did happen twice. There's all sorts of weird time messing up nonsense going on in the warp, and so some of that could easily leak through and cause issues all over the place. The only problem is that when it comes to stuff like that, quite often things will, like, developments in the story will have a direct impact on the actual world. So in the case of the 13th Black Crusade, we're talking Codex Eye of Terror, the 13th Company, both things that I have experience of because, well, I have experienced them. And so that's the only issue where retcon can cause problems. That's the only bit that I don't like. It's the fact that I can remember clearly the first one, and so I have that dissonance, I have that distance between the two where I read about the 13th Black Crusade, the newest one, the outcome of which I much preferred, by the way. Katie is gone. Good. I have that disconnect because I start reading it, I get confused because I already know how this happened. Oh no, wait, no, we're talking about the other one. No, not the first one. That's not the thing. We're talking about the new one. It's a different thing. That's the only issue I have with it. I think overall, it's a fairly decent standard take because it means you do get the odd moment. You do get the odd moment where you think, well, I kind of prefer the old thing, I don't like the fact that that's gone. But the trade-off for that is that you do have this much more open-ended, this much more kind of free universe in which more can be created, more can be talked about, and you have that ability to make things your own without feeling like you're intruding on someone else's world. Because you're not. The whole point is that it is your world. You can make the thing you want to make. You can have the chapter you want. You can have the Hive Fleet you want. You can have the warband you want. You can have the Drukhari that are perfect for you because it's not locked. It is not frozen in time. It is not in a position where everything is justified as this is how it is. You do not get to contribute because you do. You are encouraged to. There is a massive amount of creativity that goes into 40k, but it's not just from Games Workshop, it's not just from Black Library, it's from literally everybody, because we can all contribute to it, and it is done in such a way that our contributions make sense. That's actually pretty rare. That's pretty rare, and it's a really, really kind of heavy positive point for 40k as a whole, as a setting, because it allows a level of fan interaction that really, I think is not necessarily unique, but there's an encouragement there, and there is a freedom there that a lot of IPs simply don't have. But we do have that, and that's one of my favourite things about it, by far. Now, I'll link all of the videos I talked about in the description down below. I'm curious as to, firstly, what you reckon in terms of Astartes Part 5. Do you think he did just go for Yuvath, or did you think he went for something similar, but his own take on it? Did he maybe just expand on what they could do? Do you think it's just a coincidence? I'd be interested, actually. Also, if you've come up with your own backstory for a Xenos race or chapter or warband or whatever, then let me know in the comments, and like what steered you towards doing that compared to picking up something that already existed, or did you take something that already existed and adapted it slightly? Because again, that's completely feasible. That's what I did with my Scarlords. That was an established chapter, they just didn't have a huge amount of history, but now they do. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below. That got very long and rambly, I do apologise. Thank you very much for watching. Feel free to click all the things, Patreon, video, subscribe, all that stuff. Click it if you like, don't click if you don't want to. And as always, there's an affiliate link for Element Games in the description. It's a nice way to support the channel, and you can use it if you like. I leave it entirely up to you. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.